I was recently speaking with a senior policy advisor in D.C., a man who spent his entire career championing the rules-based order.
Right. A real establishment figure.
Exactly. And when the topic of the 2025 Rare Earth Agreement came up, and this is the one where the U.S. essentially traded high-end tech secrets just to keep the lights on in its defense plants, he didn't even try to offer a strategic defense.
We didn't have one.
No. Instead, he just stared at his coffee, and he recounted a visit to a shuttered processing plant in the Midwest. He described this deathly silence on the floor, the way the specialized kilns were just rusted shut.
Wow.
And he said the only person left who actually knew how to calibrate the machinery had retired a decade ago.
A decade. So the knowledge is just gone.
He looked up at me and said, "We didn't just lose the minerals, we lost the memory of how to be a superpower."
That's a heavy line.
It was. There was this heavy, almost mournful tone in his voice. He wasn't talking about like a temporary trade deficit. He was describing a kind of civilizational atrophy.
Yeah, a hollowing out.
And it gets worse. He told me that when the government finally tried to fast-track a new refinery to break this dependency, they were hit with 14 different lawsuits.
14?
14. From environmental groups, local councils, you name it, all within a month.
That's incredible.
He just laughed, this bitter laugh, and noted that while Beijing was busy executing a 40-year master plan to corner the material world, his department was struggling to get a single permit through a subcommittee that, and I quote, only meets on Tuesdays.
Only on Tuesdays. That says it all, doesn't it?
It really does. But then the conversation took this sharp, really revealing turn. I asked him if he thought the U.S. could ever truly pivot back to a real economy.
And what did he say?
His whole posture changed. Straightened up, and that defensive, that bureaucratic mask just slid right back on.
Ah, the official line.
Totally. He started talking about financial resilience and how our services-led growth and the strength of the dollar would eventually force the East to blink.
The spreadsheet argument.
He actually said it. He said, they have the dirt, but we have the spreadsheets.
Wow. He really said that.
Word for word. And that sudden shift from this raw, honest admission of industrial decay to a desperate, almost delusional reliance on financial abstraction, it was just chilling.
I can imagine.
It captured the exact essence of the crisis we're facing. We're witnessing what you could call the Suez moment of the West. It's a point where the paper power of currency and lawyers is finally colliding with the hard power reality of who can actually refine the elements that build the modern world.
It's not just a trade war.
No, it's a total deficit of state capacity. That story is, I think, the perfect frame for our mission today. We're going to do a deep dive into the mechanics of that very collision.
Right. The clash between hard power, material reality, and the abstract power of a balance sheet.
Exactly. Our goal here is to really understand how East Asian state capacity built this incredible material advantage, and at the same time, how Western systems got so tangled up in this procedural paralysis, what some call Vetocracy.
And how that paralysis led to the hollowing out of industrial competence, all in favor of, well, financial abstraction.
It's a story about what happens when you prioritize paper wealth over the memory of how to actually build things.
And what really stands out right from the beginning is this uncomfortable truth. The core vulnerability isn't some kind of natural scarcity. It's not that the elements don't exist.
Right, it's not a geology problem.
No, not at all. It's a self-inflicted wound of industrial and, frankly, political neglect. These elements, they're found all over the globe, but the strategic control that's located entirely in the complex, high-skill stages of refinement, of processing, and of applied technology.
In that control.
That control is the definition of strategic leverage in the 21st century.
Okay, so let's start with the absolute basics, because rare earth elements is a term that gets thrown around constantly.
All the time.
But I don't think most people really know why these minerals are so non-negotiable for modern life. When we look at the periodic table, what are we actually talking about?
We're dealing with 17 specific elements. Most importantly, it's the 15 metallic lanthanides. So that's atomic numbers 57 through 71. And then you add yttrium and scandium to that group.
Why them?
Because they're chemically very similar and they tend to occur alongside the lanthanides in the Earth. Now, the name rare earth is, well, it's a bit misleading.
I've heard that. They're not actually rare.
Not in a geological sense, no. In fact, many of them are more common in the Earth's crust than, say, silver or gold.
So if they're not rare, why is there this massive strategic panic? It has to be something unique about their chemical behavior, not just how much of it is in the ground.
Precisely. You've hit the nail on the head. Their indispensability comes down to atomic physics. They have a very unique electronic structure. Specifically, it's about their deeply shielded 4F electron shell.
Okay, you're going to have to translate that for me. 4F electron shell.
Right, you don't need to be a chemist to get the gist. The result of that unique shielded shell is that when you excite these atoms with light or heat or magnetism, those electrons give the material these incredible properties that are just unmatched by more common metals.
So what does that mean for the end product? What's the layman's translation?
It means extreme efficiency and miniaturization. They are basically the magic dust that lets us make things smaller, stronger, and vastly more powerful.
Give me an example.
Okay, if you want a permanent magnet that is strong enough to lift a car, but it's small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, you need rare earths.
There's no substitute.
There is no substitute. If you want a laser that can cut through steel, you need rare earths. You simply cannot replicate their powerful magnetic, optical, and catalytic properties with cheaper, more readily available elements.
That really clarifies the stakes. So let's run down some of the critical applications, because the dependency here seems to span everything from hard security to the clean energy transition.
In defense and advanced technology, they are the silent backbones of the whole system.
Silent backbones. I like that.
They're in the control and guidance systems of precision weaponry. They're in our most sophisticated semiconductor devices, high-powered lasers, military communication networks. I mean, we're talking about highly specific applications.
Like what?
Promethium, for example, is used in miniature nuclear batteries for things like deep space probes or deep-sea applications. Terbium is absolutely crucial for night vision technology. Ytterbium is essential in solid-state lasers.
So losing access to them means?
It means losing a fundamental layer of military superiority. It's that simple.
And on the civilian side, the clean energy sector is poised to just amplify this demand exponentially.
That is the core driver of all future demand projections. They are absolutely essential for the powerful permanent magnets needed to drive the motors in electric vehicles.
How much are we talking about per vehicle?
A typical EV requires a kilogram or more of rare earth elements, and it doesn't stop there. Every single large-scale modern wind turbine relies on these magnets to generate power efficiently.
So given global decarbonization goals, the demand is just going to skyrocket.
Our sources project that demand for REEs will surge anywhere from 3 to 7 times its current level by 2040.
3 to 7 times.
We are, quite literally, building the future on these 17 elements.
It's a foundational dependency. But let's bring this back to the world of finance for a moment, to the spreadsheets. It's easy to look at the global trade value of the elements themselves. What is it, about $7.5 billion in 2023?
That's the figure, yes.
And you think, that's a pretty small market. But that is completely and totally misleading.
It's the ultimate case of the tail wagging the dog. While the raw material market itself is small, the total market capitalization of all the industries that depend on these critical minerals, tech, communications, aerospace, defense, it's just staggering.
What's the number?
Our sources estimate that figure exceeds $82 trillion globally.
82 trillion. I just want to repeat that so it sinks in. $82 trillion. And that breaks down into, what, $34 trillion in technology, $18.4 trillion in communications, just for starters.
Right.
So the viability of almost the entire modern digital and defense economy hinges on the reliable availability of $7.5 billion worth of processed dirt. That is an enormous strategic vulnerability.
And that vulnerability is compounded by the control structure of the market. While China possesses significant reserves, around 36.7% globally, its true power isn't in the geology. It's in industrial mobilization.
Right. It's not what's in the ground. It's who can get it out and turn it into something useful.
Exactly. They dominate the entire value chain, especially the complex, energy-intensive, and environmentally challenging processing and refining technologies. And this wasn't an accident. This was the result of a coordinated, whole-of-government strategy executed over decades.
Just like the policy advisor said. While Western departments are stuck arguing in a subcommittee that meets on Tuesdays, Beijing has been executing a 40-year master plan. What does that kind of technocratic planning actually look like in practice?
It's a form of highly managed capitalism. The state uses these incredibly powerful ministries, primarily the National Development and Reform Commission, the NDRC.
That's their chief economic planning agency, right?
That's the one. Them and the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, or MIIT, they work together to ensure a stable, profitable, and, crucially, an oligopolistic industry structure.
So the goal isn't free market competition.
No, not at all. The goal is to maximize long-term strategic control, not short-term shareholder returns.
So they didn't just let a market emerge. They actively shaped the industry, making sure they created national champions rather than just letting hundreds of small competitors fight it out.
Exactly. There was intentional state-managed consolidation. For instance, during the mid-2010s, they dramatically reduced the number of rare earths smelting and processing companies.
From what to what?
They cut them down from 99 firms to just 59.
Wow. That's a huge cut.
It is. And what that does is it eliminates smaller firms that might be using outdated or, polluting processes. It centralizes all the technological know-how, and it ensures that the remaining state enterprise conglomerates can command profitable pricing on the global stage. It's industrial policy conducted with the cold logic of an engineer.
And that kind of sustained top-down execution. It requires more than just industrial coordination. You need serious scientific leadership. Did they also invest heavily in the intellectual foundation?
They integrated industry and research beautifully. China is now the indisputable global leader in rare earth research.
Is there data on that?
Oh, yeah. To illustrate, just between the years 2000 and 2016, the Chinese Academy of Sciences produced the greatest volume of scientific research papers on rare earth materials worldwide, by a large margin.
So this is capacity building from the ground up, from the lab bench, ensuring they don't just control the current tech, but they're poised to invent the next generation of rare earth-dependent technology.
And that intellectual and industrial dominance has now translated directly into geopolitical leverage through technology controls, not just quotas on the minerals themselves.
That's a much more aggressive strategic move.
It is. After the WTO ruled against China's use of raw material export quotas back in 2014, they pivoted. They shifted to controlling the know-how.
So it's not you can't have the dirt, it's you can't have the recipe to cook the dirt.
That's a perfect way to put it. In recent years, they've restricted the export of key processing technologies for minerals like gallium and germanium. And most critically, they've imposed a complete ban on the export of rare earth extraction and separation technologies, as well as the manufacturing equipment for high-performance permanent magnets.
That is a master stroke of strategic control.
It is.
Because if you have the raw materials and you also ban the export of the proprietary knowledge required to refine them into the valuable end products, you've essentially locked the rest of the world into a permanent state of dependence. You've sealed the gap.
It's a completely comprehensive strategy. You control the geology, you control the processing, you control the science, and you control the manufacturing equipment. It creates an almost insurmountable barrier to entry for any competitor who's hoping to diversify the supply chain.
So to really grasp how this level of speed and efficiency was achieved, we have to look past the rare earth sector itself for a moment and analyze the underlying economic philosophy, the East Asian industrial model. This isn't the purely free market capitalism that we tend to associate with the West.
No, it's a highly structured form of development. It's often referred to by terms like dirigism, which implies strong state direction, or even neo-mercantilism.
So a modified form of capitalism.
A very modified form. The state isn't just a referee watching the game. The state is the primary coach, it's the strategist, and often it's the major investor, guiding the entire direction of economic development.
The state recognizes where the market fails then, especially in these capital-intensive, high-risk, long-term strategic industries, and it just steps in to fill that gap.
Exactly. The governments in this region, and this was pioneered historically by Japan, then followed by South Korea, Taiwan, and now, of course, mainland China, they understood that leaving the development of strategic sectors like semiconductors or steel or now rare earths entirely to short-term private market forces would just lead to failure.
So the intervention is deliberate.
It's deliberate, it's systematic, and it's aimed at creating national champions that can compete on a global scale.
What are the tangible features of this active state intervention that allow them to move so much faster than we can in the West?
There are really four key things. First, state control, or at least heavy influence over the financial system. That lets them direct credit and preferential financing toward these strategic sectors.
Okay, that's huge.
It is. Second, direct support, subsidies, and protection for state-owned enterprises, or SOEs, or even creating privately owned national champions. Think of Samsung or Hyundai in South Korea. Third is a foundational reliance on export markets, and that's coupled with very high domestic savings rates, which provides this deep pool of capital needed for huge investments.
And the fourth?
The fourth is the proactive provision of all necessary public infrastructure. We're talking roads, cheap and reliable electricity, advanced education systems, all designed to ensure optimal operating conditions for these key industries.
It sounds like a system that is designed explicitly to counter the short-term focus of Western public markets.
Yeah.
And the result of that is just astonishing speed, especially when we look at infrastructure projects abroad.
The speed is the operational definition of state capacity. Just look at the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. The sheer scale is enormous, with grants and lending that exceeded $1.3 trillion just between 2000 and 2021.
$1 trillion.
But the execution timeline is what's really mind-boggling.
So tell us again the gap between their speed and that of, say, traditional multilateral development banks.
It's massive. Infrastructure projects financed by China through the BRI required only 2.7 years on average.
From proposal to cash in hand.
From the initial proposal to the issuing of the loans, yes, 2.7 years. Now, you contrast that with the 5 to 10 years typically required by institutions like the World Bank or other regional development banks to get to financial close.
5 to 10 years versus under 3. That difference, it isn't just about financial efficiency, is it? It represents political stability and influence.
It does.
If you're a developing nation and you desperately need a port or a power plant, you cannot afford to wait a decade for financing that's bogged down in layers of Western procedural due diligence and environmental assessments.
That speed translates directly into geopolitical capital. It makes China the indispensable partner for nations seeking rapid development. It solidifies its position as the world's largest official creditor to the developing world.
And that grants them leverage.
Tremendous leverage over diplomacy, over trade routes, and crucially, over access to global raw materials. The ability to execute quickly is in itself a form of hard power.
And this speed and scale, it suggests that their state enterprises must be operating under a completely different financial mandate than, say, a company listed on the New York Stock Exchange.
A completely different universe.
You're focused on building real assets, not just hitting a quarterly earnings per share target.
That is the crucial distinction. These state enterprises benefit from substantial financial advantages, and they're all designed to prioritize long-term, capital-intensive capacity building over short-term financial returns. They're effectively shielded from market pressures by the state itself.
So how does the state provide that financial shielding? Is it mostly through direct cash handouts?
It's a multi-layered financial framework. You can start with taxation. There were studies from the late 2000s that showed this massive disparity.
What did they find?
The surveyed state-owned enterprises paid an average tax burden of just 10%. Now compare that to the 24% paid by private enterprises.
So less than half.
Less than half. They also benefit from significantly lower resource taxes. Sometimes they pay less than a 2% charge on oil, for example, compared to 12.5% for joint ventures.
That is essentially a direct, continuous subsidy built right into the cost structure. It allows them to reinvest more capital or just undercut global competitors on price.
And beyond the tax breaks, they get direct and in-kind subsidies. This can range from direct cash infusions to ensure a steady supply in a critical sector to granting valuable in-kind benefits.
Like what kind of benefits?
For example, state-owned telecom firms might receive highly valuable radio frequency licenses completely free of charge. These are massive inputs of non-market value.
And I assume the most important financial input is just access to capital itself.
Absolutely. The state-owned banks provide assured capital access and highly preferential interest rates. A strategic industrial project that's deemed necessary by the NDRC will never stall because a private bank decided the short-term profit margin was too thin.
That's a guarantee we just don't have.
It guarantees that capital flows consistently toward building industrial capacity, maintaining that real economy focus. In the West, we prioritize shareholder value. In this model, they prioritize the long-term material needs of the state.
So we've seen the blueprint for material supremacy. It's decades of coordinated planning, scientific leadership, guaranteed capital, and just sheer speed of execution. Now we have to turn to the other side of this equation and see how the Western system became so strategically vulnerable.
Right.
If the East Asian model is defined by speed, our opening anecdote suggests the Western model is now defined by inertia. And we're delving into what political scientists have started calling vetocracy.
Vetocracy. It's a devastating concept, really.
What does it mean exactly?
It describes a governance system where the power to stop action, the veto power, is distributed across so many different political, legal, and bureaucratic actors that it becomes nearly impossible for the system to execute large-scale projects.
It leads to what? Massive delays?
Massive time delays and huge cost overruns. It's structural paralysis baked into the system.
This sounds like a philosophical problem, but the policy advisor was talking about something very real. He said the government was hit with 14 lawsuits in a month, just trying to build one new refinery. We need to ground this in the reality of what it means to try and build a crucial piece of infrastructure in the West today.
It means that every single stage of construction becomes a legal battlefield. Take even a simple, clearly beneficial civil project.
Okay.
Our sources highlight efforts to install new sewer pipes for homes with failing septic systems. I mean, that's a clear environmental benefit, right?
Of course.
Yet, if those pipes have to cross a single stream, the permitting process alone can take years.
Years to install a sewer pipe.
Years. So if a vital, small-scale environmental improvement requires years of negotiation, just imagine the permitting labyrinth for a new rare earth processing facility, which requires enormous energy and carries its own environmental risks.
The time required becomes the enemy of industrial capacity. 5 years of permitting delays means the entire financial model of a project probably collapses.
And that leaves the field wide open to foreign competitors who can execute the entire project in under 3 years.
Right.
And the environmental regulatory framework, while it's rooted in necessary principles, often provides the most effective leverage for this kind of paralysis. The story about the reservoir aeration project is a perfect encapsulation of the trade-offs involved in Vetocracy.
Tell us those details again. This was a project designed to improve drinking water quality, wasn't it?
Yes. The goal was to prevent algae blooms and improve the quality of municipal drinking water, a clear public health and environmental good.
But it got stopped.
It was ultimately canceled by state regulators, the reason. They identified an endangered insect species that breeds specifically in that reservoir.
An insect.
An insect. And the aeration process, which was designed to mix the water and prevent stagnation, would potentially impact the insect's habitat.
So a vital public health utility project was halted by the needs of a single endangered insect species. The irony there is, it's just enormous. What does that tell us about the Western system's values right now?
It tells us that the Western political system, in many cases, has prioritized infinite legal process and the preservation of every individual interest, no matter how small over the ability to execute large-scale, strategic, or even environmentally beneficial projects for the collective good.
The system is rigged toward inertia.
It is. Furthermore, the laws themselves, like the Endangered Species Act, often rely on vague regulations that are politically very difficult to reform. This leads to what our sources describe as a hodgepodge of interpretations based on case law.
So if every legal interpretation is open to dispute, then every step of development is inherently uncertain. It just invites costly litigation.
And the system rewards the lawyers who block things, and it punishes the engineers who try to build them.
So the developer or the government agency, they just don't know which interpretation they're going to face in court next week.
And that uncertainty is itself a cost. It makes an investment in long-term, capital-intensive projects in the West a profoundly risky endeavor compared to the certainty offered by state planning elsewhere. This inability to execute is a fundamental strategic failure.
And procedural paralysis is only one half of this decay. The other half, and it's maybe more haunting, is the material loss of specialized competence.
This is what the policy advisor in your opening called the loss of memory.
Yes.
And it speaks to the irreplaceable decay of the industrial base itself.
The image of those specialized kilns just rusted shut and the last technician having retired a decade ago. It's so powerful because it reminds us that expertise is often tacit.
It lives in people's hands and in their minds. It's not just in textbooks or computer models.
And once that generation retires, that knowledge is just gone.
And regaining it is incredibly difficult and time-consuming. You can always go mine more dirt, but you cannot simply hire 100 expert metallurgists who know how to calibrate highly specialized rare earth processing machinery when the entire industry has vanished from your shores.
That expertise takes years to develop.
And decades to institutionalize.
So we need to understand why this memory was allowed to fade. This intellectual and cultural shift in management, it's often traced back to the post-World War II era, and specifically to figures like Robert McNamara and the rise of the bean counter.
This is the critical intellectual failure. McNamara and the Whiz Kids, as they were called, at Ford Motor Company, they pioneered an approach that prioritized systems analysis and abstract financial control.
So the key shift was that control moved away from the car guys.
Exactly. Away from the engineers, the designers, the people who actually understood the product, and toward executives whose knowledge was purely abstract. They focused on metrics, statistics, financial modeling.
They weren't rewarded for designing a better engine. They were rewarded for identifying a department that could be cut by 15%.
Precisely. The guiding principle became management by numbers. Technological matters were just relegated to being mere adjuncts to finance. The focus shifted obsessively to cost-cutting and short-term optimization of the balance sheet, rather than the long-term, often expensive, investment required for R&D and technological superiority.
And this intellectual framework became the dominant dogma in business schools by the mid-1960s.
It did.
Can you give us an example where this shift in culture led directly to a company's demise?
Xerox is the perfect case study.
Xerox.
An incredibly innovative company, foundational in so many modern technologies. But after they hired executives who were steeped in this new Ford-style management philosophy, the company aggressively tightened its budgets and cut way back on R&D.
The priority became immediate financial performance.
Exactly. And Xerox, once completely dominant, went into a permanent decline. They lost vast amounts of market share and ended up selling off assets just to stay solvent.
So the intellectual hollowing out created a vacuum. The product experts and the engineers were marginalized, and the financial analysts took over. And this creates the perfect stage for the final piece of our story. The full-scale reign of the spreadsheet. They have the dirt, but we have the spreadsheets. That, quote, perfectly encapsulates this delusional shift we're now exploring, what we call financialization.
This is the process where the financial sector moves from serving the real economy to controlling it and ultimately cannibalizing it.
Traditionally, the role of finance and banking was supposed to be the servant of productive capital, right?
Right. Banks would gather deposits and direct that capital efficiently toward building things, factories, machinery, infrastructure. They were supposed to be the lubrication for the real economy.
And the failure is that the relationship completely flipped. It became this upside-down economy where the tail started wagging the dog.
Yes. The sheer disproportionate power is alarming. Today, the finance and insurance sector in the U.S. accounts for only about 7% of the total economy. It creates a mere 4% of all jobs.
7% of the economy, 4% of jobs.
Yet that small sector now generates over a quarter of all corporate profits.
A quarter?
Over a quarter. That's a massive accumulation of wealth and power, up from just 10% 25 years ago, with virtually no increase in real productive output.
So the returns generated by abstract financial maneuvering, just moving paper around, they dwarf the returns generated by the hard work of building and manufacturing. That must create a severe misallocation of talent.
It absolutely does. This environment breeds what you could call a casino mentality in financial markets. Why would the brightest, most mathematically gifted graduates from our top universities choose the long, difficult path of getting a PhD in material science or chemical engineering to work on a new, rare earth process?
When they can earn exponentially more money in high-speed, high-stakes finance.
Exactly. They are drawn away from fields that build the foundational economy and toward fields that extract value from the existing economy.
And that means our ability to innovate and solve complex industrial problems just slowly but surely atrophies. The spreadsheet is literally stealing the intelligence needed to manage the dirt.
And this systemic incentive structure is then magnified within publicly traded companies through what's called financial engineering. Managers are rewarded for creating the appearance of value growth, even when the underlying operational efficiency is collapsing.
The productivity paradox.
Right. So you can't just rely on the reported profits. You have to look deeper into the forensic accounting to see the actual operational health of the firm.
Which is where that pharmaceutical case study comes in. The big UK firms, AstraZeneca and GlaxoSmithKline, between 2011 and 2018.
It's so revealing. These firms are supposed to be beacons of high-value R&D intensive innovation, but the data shows a severe internal decay.
So what happened to their foundational equity, their asset base?
The hollowing out was dramatic. AstraZeneca's real net assets, and that's a critical measure of a firm's safety and its equity base, they were halved. They fell from $28.2 billion to $14.0 billion. And GSK was even worse. Their net assets fell by 2/3. This isn't just a dip. This is the literal financial foundation of these industrial giants crumbling away.
And if the foundations are crumbling, What happened to their actual ability to generate revenue efficiently from their core business?
The productivity plunge was stark. AstraZeneca's real EBITDA per employee fell by nearly 2/3 during that period.
And EBITDA, just to remind everyone, is a good indicator of how efficiently the factory floor and the operating divisions are running, right? Stripped of all the complex accounting maneuvers.
That's right. And by 2018, their efficiency was so low, it was comparable to UK water utility companies.
Wait a minute. A water utility company is a monopoly. It has guaranteed, slow, steady returns. A pharmaceutical company is supposed to be high risk, high reward, R&D intensive. If your productivity is comparable to a monopoly utility, you have fundamentally failed to innovate. That comparison is absolutely damning.
It demonstrates the complete shift in focus. The management team isn't focused on revolutionary drug development. They're focused on maintaining the stock price through financial maneuvers. And the primary maneuver they use is the acquire and distribute model, which is driven by mergers and acquisitions, M&A.
Why does M&A become so appealing to management teams in a financialized system like this?
It's a trick of accounting that involves something called goodwill.
Goodwill.
When Company A buys Company B for more than its tangible asset value, the premium is listed as goodwill, which is a capital asset based on expected future cash flow.
Okay.
This goodwill is essentially monetized twice. Once when it's added to the balance sheet, which inflates assets and equity, and then again later as actual income. This system creates an overwhelming incentive for management to seek out M&A, simply to juice the balance sheet and create the illusion of growth.
Rather than investing in risky, long-term internal R&D.
Precisely.
So they're buying paper assets to compensate for the fact that their operational efficiency is sinking. And how do they keep the shareholders happy while their real productive engine is slowing down? Debt and dividends, I'm guessing?
They rely heavily on financial abstraction. The GSK case is shocking here. Between 2016 and 2018, the consolidated group, the whole company, had negative earnings. They were losing money on operations.
But they paid dividends.
They paid out $12.7 billion in dividends.
How is that even legal, to pay out dividends when you are in the red operationally?
They exploit a loophole in UK company law. The legal limit for dividend distribution is based on the retained earnings of the parent company, not the negative earnings of the whole consolidated group.
So they could tap into old reserves.
It allowed them to tap retained reserves, which are often inflated by subsidiary valuations, to prioritize shareholder payouts even when the real business was struggling.
That is aggressive leveraging designed purely to please the market, regardless of the firm's long-term health. What was the impact on their debt?
The risk that's introduced by this maneuvering is called gearing risk. It's the debt-to-equity ratio. Now, for R&D-intensive firms, a prudent ratio is typically around 2-to-1.
And GSK?
GSK quadrupled its debt-to-equity ratio between 2011 and 2018. It ended up with a ratio of 7-to-1.
7-to-1. So for every dollar of equity the shareholders own, the company owes $7 to creditors.
Yes.
That level of fragility means the moment the economy or the market hiccups, that sophisticated industrial firm is just incredibly fragile. They've sacrificed decades of industrial stability for a few years of inflated shareholder payouts.
And this behavior is fundamentally driven by the dominant ideology of shareholder value maximization.
An idea heavily championed since the 1970s.
Right. The belief that the corporation has no higher duty than to maximize the financial return for its stockholders. This has codified the downsize and distribute model, which has replaced the older, more sustainable strategy of retain and reinvest.
And the main mechanism for that distribution is the stock buyback, which used to be restricted but was effectively legalized by the SEC back in 1982.
Correct. And the scale of this cannibalization is just unbelievable. American firms spent a colossal $7 trillion buying back their own stock in the last decade alone.
$7 trillion.
That's equivalent to half of their total profits. And in some recent years, the combination of buybacks and dividends has actually exceeded the net earnings of all publicly traded companies combined.
So companies are literally spending more money to enrich existing shareholders than they are earning through their productive operations. That doesn't just slow innovation. It actively erodes the capital base they need to compete.
It artificially inflates the earnings per share, or EPS, metric, which executive compensation is often tied to, but it starves long-term investment in R&D, new machinery, and workforce training. And what's worse, sometimes companies even borrow money to conduct these buybacks.
Adding debt purely for financial manipulation. The Apple example is notorious for this. Borrowing money despite holding massive cash reserves.
And in 2013, Apple borrowed $17 billion despite having $145 billion in cash reserves at the time. They did it specifically to fund buybacks, exploiting favorable interest rates and avoiding tax issues related to repatriating their offshore cash. And while they were doing this, Apple's R&D as a percentage of sales, which had already been declining for over a decade, dipped even further.
Using debt to manipulate the stock price instead of using it to invent the future.
And this entire trend is perfectly summarized by the transformation of one of the greatest American industrial icons, General Electric.
GE's story is the ultimate tragedy of financialization.
Under former CEO Jack Welch, the focus of the company shifted away from making things, jet engines, medical equipment, to moving money around.
Right.
The financial services division, GE Capital, grew so large that at its peak, it accounted for over half of GE's total corporate profits.
So it stopped being an industrial giant and became a closet bank that just happened to have an aircraft engine division.
And that transformation made it existentially vulnerable. GE Capital's assets ballooned to nearly $700 billion. When the financial crisis hit in 2008, it became part of the too-big-to-fail crisis. It required a massive $139 billion bailout guarantee from the FDIC.
Unbelievable.
The pursuit of easy, abstract financial profits replaced the hard, dedicated work of industrial excellence. As the logic went, financial operations seemed an easy way to make money. You didn't have to invest heavily in R&D, build factories, and bend metal day after day. But that easy money ultimately cost the U.S. industrial base its capacity and its resilience.
The spreadsheets won the cultural battle, but the victory came at the expense of the real economy's material foundation.
This deep dive has, I think, really confirmed the monumental duality of this crisis. On one side, you have the West's operational capacity, and it's crippled by two things. First, the regulatory inertia and legal vetocracy that blocks us from building essential infrastructure. And second, these inverted financial incentives that prioritize paper wealth, the stock buybacks, the M&A goodwill, the debt-fueled dividends over long-term, real-world industrial production.
And meanwhile, the East Asian model is leveraging technocratic state capacity, speed, and long-term planning to seize control of the essential material inputs for the entire modern world. This is the collision point that the policy advisor was lamenting.
Historically, the West has maintained its rules-based hegemony through financial power, right? The strength of the dollar, the stability of its legal frameworks. But that hegemony is now facing the hard reality of East Asian material supremacy.
Because when you control the rare earths...
When you control the rare earths needed for guidance systems, for electric vehicles, for high-performance magnets, you possess a form of hard power that transcends currency fluctuations and legal disputes. The material reality is challenging the paper reality.
This Suez moment isn't about a canal. It's about the realization that abstract financial power cannot substitute for the industrial and technical competence to build the elements of your own national security and your own prosperity.
And overcoming this systemic deficit of state capacity requires a profound strategic recalibration. We can't just wish the problem away.
No.
The West has to adopt a methodical, long-term, whole-of-government approach that mirrors the scale and commitment of its competitors, even while it maintains its distinct political values.
And that requires completely new ways of thinking about financing industrial projects, ways that bypass the quarterly report mandate of the private market.
Absolutely. The need is for patient capital. This means establishing robust systems of rare earth reserves and committing significant financial resources, whether that's through government equity or state-backed debt, that can be delivered on a timeline competitive with that rapid 2.7-year financing process we see in the East Asian model.
We have to build new financial structures.
Structures designed for decades of industrial growth, not for quarterly profit targets.
And how do we stabilize these new supply chains? If a Western mine opens, what stops a state-backed competitor from just flooding the market and driving them into bankruptcy within a year?
The answer has to be strategic procurement. Allied governments must use coordinated, large-scale procurement commitments, perhaps modeled on national defense contracting.
So you guarantee a buyer.
You guarantee sustained demand for non-Chinese suppliers. And by doing that, you can stabilize these diversified mining and processing ventures, shielding them from the aggressive price manipulation strategies that have historically undermined Western capacity. It creates resilience through collective economic commitment.
And finally, we have to reclaim that memory that was lost. We have to address the intellectual decline and the hollowing out of technical expertise.
Substantially increasing R&D investment is completely non-negotiable, not only in locating new sources of rare earths, but also, crucially, in the processing technology, in developing non-rare earth substitutes, and in advanced recycling technologies. Overcoming this deficit of state capacity requires an intellectual and financial pivot away from the prioritization of abstract financial metrics.
And back towards supporting the real economy, the industrial base, and the essential technical skills that are necessary to build and maintain the modern world.
Exactly.
The ultimate challenge here, I think, is internalizing this central realization. The health of a balance sheet is completely meaningless if the nation no longer possesses the competence to produce the foundational goods that underwrite it. The strength of a nation and its resilience is ultimately measured not by the complexity of its financial instruments, but by the material things it can build with its own hands and its own specialized memory.